When people ask whether economic protest actually works, history gives a very clear answer. The blueprint for economic protest shows up very clearly in American history, starting with a woman named Elizabeth Jennings in 1854. It's a question I hear a lot, especially from educators and community leaders who are trying to help students understand what real change looks like beyond hashtags and headlines, because history tells us something very specific. Boycotts only work under certain conditions. And when they do work, the impact is measurable, not symbolic. If you've been hearing people debate whether economic pressure makes a difference, listen to how Pastor Jamal Bryant describes the impact of the Target fast.
13 weeks we stayed out of Target. And in those 13 weeks, history was made because I want you to know the valuation dropped by $12 billion. Because of our committed, organized, unified efforts, the stock went down from $145 a share to $93 a share.
When it comes to Elizabeth Jennings, she made a decision, and that decision revealed how closely civil rights and economic power have always been connected. She boarded a streetcar in New York City, a space that depended on Black riders for revenue, but denied them dignity and equal access. When she refused to get off, she was forcibly removed. At first glance, this might look like a simple act of defiance, but what really was happening was economic. Public transportation wasn't just about movement, it was about labor, access, and participation in the city's economy. By excluding Black riders, companies were controlling who could move freely and who could work efficiently and who could fully participate in daily life. Elizabeth Jennings challenged that system. Her case went to court, and she won not just the right to ride, but a legal acknowledgement that segregation on public transportation carried consequences. The numbers suggest it does. According to Nielsen, Black consumers control well over $1 trillion in buying power in the United States. That kind of economic presence means decisions about where money is spent or withheld still carry weight. What's different now is visibility. Campaigns move faster, information spreads wider, but the underlying mechanism hasn't changed. Institutions respond when economic pressure is organized, sustained, and clearly directed, and that's the distinction people often miss. About 100 years after Elizabeth Jennings in 1955, the Montgomery Bus Boycott wasn't just a moral protest, it was an economic one. Over a year, Black riders stayed off buses, cutting directly into the city's revenue. The buses still ran, but the money didn't move the same way, and eventually the system broke. A few years later, in Greensboro, North Carolina, college students used a different tactic: sit-ins at segregated lunch counters. But the pressure point was still economic. Businesses faced lost sales, negative attention, and a growing sense that maintaining segregation was costing more than changing it. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they talk about protest is assuming that visibility alone equals impact. Marches and viral moments can draw attention, but attention by itself doesn't force change. History shows us that change happens when pressure is sustained, strategic, and targeted, not when it's loud for a weekend and forgotten by Monday.
Now, part of our campaign, it wasn't the "We Ain't Buying It" campaign was not a boycott. It was a series of actions, economic actions. And one of those actions that has continued to go, we want people to continue to support it, has been the Target boycott. The Target boycott is being led by Black folks. Dr. Jamal Bryant, I just did a panel with him in Montgomery because we're celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. This was a boycott that was supposed to be one day, that wound up lasting for 381 days. Like initially with the boycott, it was not so that you could actually get the people, Black folks, all they said they wanted was to be treated with dignity and respect. And as a result, as the movement continued to grow, they were able to ask for some specific demands that literally led to the integration of public transportation all around the country. So I'm saying that because I want people to understand that those 5 days of, as those of you that participated, thank you, y'all, they mad, we win it, right? We've got to build on our success, but mighty rivers are filled drop by drop.
The civil rights movement wasn't built on a single moment. It was built on consistency. Boycotts that lasted months, organizing that took years, and communities that refused to let that issue fade. Economic pressure works the same way. It's not about making noise once. It's about holding the line enough that institutions are forced to respond. Economic pressure only works when there's leverage that forces change. History shows us that economic boycotts don't succeed simply because people are angry. They succeed when anger is structured and there's a plan, a timeline, and a clear understanding of what change is being demanded. The Montgomery Bus Boycott didn't work because people were upset for a week. It worked because the community stayed organized for over a year. Carpools were created, churches coordinated, and community leaders stayed disciplined about the goal. And behavior sustained over time is what changes systems. Corporations are built on perception, confidence, and predictability. Stock prices rise when investors believe a company is stable. Brand loyalty grows when customers trust that a company understands its audience. Boycotts disrupt all of that. When consumers withhold their dollars in a coordinated way, it introduces uncertainty. Leaders begin asking questions. Boards demand explanations. Investors grow nervous. And suddenly, what once felt like a distant protest becomes a measurable risk. There's also a psychological shift on the consumer side. Participating in a boycott gives people a sense of agency. Instead of feeling powerless in the face of large institutions, individuals recognize that everyday choices, where they shop, what they support, and what they refuse, carry weight. That shared action builds solidarity, which strengthens commitment over time. Boycotts work best when people believe their participation matters. Others are participating too, and there is a clear purpose behind the sacrifice. It comes from people who know the history, understand the system, and choose to act with intention again and again. Economic boycotts don't last because people are angry. They last because people are informed. Education is what turns outrage into strategy and participation into endurance. When communities understand why a boycott exists, what it is that they're trying to change, and how economic pressure actually works, people are more likely to stay committed, even when the headlines move on. Education provides that context. It connects present day action to historical precedent. It reminds participants that they're part of a longer arc. It's not just an isolated incident. We've seen this pattern before. The Montgomery Bus Boycott wasn't sustained by emotion alone. It was supported by daily organizing, meetings, shared information, and collective problem solving. Because when we remember how change has worked before, we stop asking whether our actions will matter and start asking how we make them more effective. Do economic boycotts actually work? History tells us they actually do, but only under specific conditions. They work when there's a clear demand, not just public anger. And they work when education sustains the effort long enough for institutions to feel real pressure. From Elizabeth Jennings refusing to leave a streetcar, to the Montgomery Bus Boycott, to Greensboro, North Carolina, the pattern is consistent. Economic pressure doesn't create change overnight. It creates change when people understand the system that they're pushing against and commit to applying pressure strategically. If this conversation made you see economic protests in a different way, I invite you to go deeper. In the Erase series, I explore the stories that often don't make it into textbooks like Elizabeth Jennings, and how everyday decisions sparked movements that reshaped American life. You can watch the full episode of Erase, the Elizabeth Jennings story, in the link below. And if you're an educator or organizer or just a lifelong learner, you can also find some companion resources designed to help you connect history to what's happening today. Because understanding the past isn't about nostalgia. It's about how to move forward with clarity, intention, and power.